Hi, this is Kelly. You're listening to Brianna Cea from Generation Vote on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast Podcast Network. Hi everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am on today with Brianna Cea, who is the CEO and co-founder of Generation Vote. Hi, Brianna.
Hey, how are you? Super happy to be on here.
Yeah, thrilled to have you on. So let's start with just sort of what is Generation Vote and how did it get started?
So at Generation Vote, we are building a movement that essentially transforms the way young people engage in local politics and advocacy campaigns through our unique model of engagement, which we call the Gen Vote model. It basically came out of a super grassroots, student-driven, topsy-turvy volunteer operation that I led when I was a student at Binghamton University, which is this public school in upstate New York, and is in a pretty interesting community in terms of looking at how young people interact and can influence local politics. And so when I got to Binghamton, I was one of those really energetic freshmen, and I wanted to get involved in everything in 2015. And when I joined every single political club on campus, you name it, from College Dems to even the Republicans, the Roosevelt Institute, the pre-law societies, the PIRGs, I started noticing ways that these organizations were plugging young people into civic and political opportunities in Broome County, which was the surrounding local community. And I could not help but feel that there was more that we can do to get young people involved in local politics and to actually have our voices be heard. You know, time and time again, candidates would come to our College Dem meetings, for example, and would show up with a pizza pie and say, vote for me because obviously y'all are young voters and you're Democrats. And so come knock on doors and, help us out in the lead up to Election Day. And so when I started thinking about these interactions and asking around to folks in the local community about how young people were being engaged in local politics, I was encountered by a candidate who was running for Broome County executive. And he wanted to basically flip the county administration from red to blue. And as we're talking about local politics and why I was involved in everything as a new freshman on campus, he was like, "Do you get any sleep?" And I was like, "Barely, not doing things right, but I'm learning." He asked me this really interesting question, which was, I want to get young people involved in my race and in my campaign for Broome County executive, but I don't want to just show up with a pizza pie and say, "Vote for me." So how can we actually get students interested in such a local race, especially with the lead up to the 2016 presidential election? And I became obsessed with this question. I thought about it, I slept on it, and I created this organization that was called Bing for Broome at the time, that topsy-turvy volunteer operation, and essentially ran all of the youth operations out of that campaign and tested what became known as the Gen Vote model of engagement, and really expanded the way and changed the way people in Broome County viewed students as, actors in local government, which was really exciting.
Yeah, so talk to me then a little bit about this model. What are the kinds of things that really get young people engaged and wanting to be part of the political process?
So the way that we start with the Gen Vote model is to essentially get students together and to use campuses as mobilizing centers in local communities and start what we now call Generation Vote teams. These teams are essentially mini campaigns that operate out of campuses. And we fully believe that in order to have successful youth infrastructure and political organizing, you need to invest in every single student organizer and invest in the leadership development all throughout the progressive pipeline. And so our Generation Vote team range between 5 to 14 students. And every single student is trained with a specific skill set. So for example, we have student opinion research directors, communication directors, student constituency organizers. And our national staff works with each of these students to become experts in their specific field. The second step of the model is to actually work with our students to understand what young people care about in their community. And that's what we did in Broome County. We essentially created the first student opinions research effort to understand what issues young people cared about at Binghamton University and beyond. Like what issues would get you out to vote and to get you to vote for a local Broome County executive. And on top of that, we also try to understand gaps in political education and awareness. And so often there's a lot of conversation around national politics and obviously in presidential years, the presidential election, the primary, but surprisingly enough, that knowledge rate really drops off when you look down the ballot. So we wanted to know how many students actually knew about the Broome County executive race and knew who the Broome County executive was at the time. We then collect all this information with our students and analyze this data to create what we now call youth platforms. And these are essentially policy agendas that address the issues that were in our data collection efforts and really speak to the issues that young people care about. Because studies show that young people, our generation, votes on the issues. We aren't just party ticket voters these days. So if politicians want our votes, they need to actually speak to the issues that will drive us to the polls and drive us to their work on their campaigns. After the third step, if students want to work on local races, we usually recommend House representatives and down. They then partner with local candidates who can be champions for the issues that were in the youth platform and actually empower young people in their campaigns by endorsing the youth platforms and integrating young people at all levels of their campaign leadership and essentially contract out their youth operations to the Gen Vote teams and young volunteers on their campaign. And then finally, if the candidate wins, which we saw as a result of that first race that I worked on in Broome County and in the races we worked on since, where we literally can flip districts without vote, they have a champion now in office that can work to enact the issues of the platform, which we saw again once our candidate for Broome County Executive won. He actually enacted policies that were written by students and for students to empower young people. And if the candidate loses, you still were able to educate your peers and educate your community about these issues and build that infrastructure moving forward around both local campaigns and issue coalitions that you're working on.
So what you've talked about sort of the what's happened so far. How many people are involved at this point? What's sort of your plans moving into 2020 for really getting a large amount of engagement?
Yeah, good question. So I guess to touch a little bit upon what we've done so far and how we want to grow. When we created this model, we wanted to make sure that this is something that students actually wanted to do and that it worked. This was 2016, the release of the Broome County executive race. And when we analyzed the results of that campaign, we saw that we not only won by 10 points, but we also beat prior campus voter turnout by like 44 percentage points. And even more astounding was the fact that 85% of the campus voters at Binghamton cast a vote for this county executive candidate. We basically ran this model again during the last school year, both at Binghamton University and at the University of Albany as pilot programs. Again, to ensure that this model worked and that this was something that students and candidates would be interested in investing in. So our students at Binghamton, for example, worked on the New York 22nd congressional race, which was one of the top 5 congressional races in the country in 2018. And the results, again, prove that if you focus on issues and focus on empowering youth leaders in your campaigns, you can win, right? So at Binghamton, for example, our Gen Vote students helped increase campus turnout by over 300 percentage points. And on election night, it looked like student votes alone helped flip New York 22. And so after looking at the results at both Binghamton University and at the University of Albany during our first year, we then knew that this was something that we can grow into a statewide movement. So we have worked with campuses across upstate New York and both in downstate New York to start Gen Vote teams. And we currently are at 10 campuses throughout New York as well as Florida. And we are looking to expand our movement in key critical states that have not only potential in terms of swing elections, but also have the greatest potential for growing the youth progressive movement in their communities. And so, for example, we're looking to expand the Gen Vote model and are working with campus administrators in Florida, Ohio, Michigan, for example, to build the Gen Vote movement. And we have really mapped out for the next 2 years kind of where we want to grow and how we can help support youth leaders in each of these communities moving forward.
So you've mentioned sort of thinking about the issues that young people care about. Are there sort of commonalities, issues that they're very often most focused on? What are the sorts of things you're seeing as you're talking to the college age voters of the kinds of issues that they really care about most?
Right, that's a great question. And so in terms of kind of the student opinions research efforts that we do on our campuses, we focus on all different levels of issues that students care about. So for example, if we are looking at issues that will drive students to participate and vote in a national level or a federal level campaign, such as a congressional race, the issues are pretty similar to what we see in national polls. So for example, climate resilience and climate change is an issue that really mobilizes and energizes students in terms of voting for elected officials that will support policies that will address these crises in our communities. Outside of that, gun reform is another popular issue among students in terms of looking at federal elections that will, again, get them to support candidates that will fight against the gun lobby and protect our communities. But we also look at issues on the local level to understand and gauge what students care about in their communities, both at the city council level, at the county legislature level. And those issues vary pretty dramatically, all the way from parking and what that means for access for students in their local campuses and in their communities, to things like housing affordability and fighting against gentrification in communities, as well as addressing police brutality on the local level and ensuring that we are plugging students in these conversations at all different levels and not just focusing on what can we do on the national ground, but rather, in our local communities.
So what sort of a response are you getting from candidates? Are there candidates that are really excited about thinking about ways to mobilize youth voters and youth volunteers? Are any candidates sort of dubious about the youth vote? What does that side of it look like?
Oh, that's a great question. So far, since we created the Gen Vote model and have talked to both students and candidates, the response from candidates and people, or at least people who want to run for office, have been overwhelmingly positive. I think one of the most interesting things that came out of us creating the Generation Vote and the Gen Vote model of engagement was talking to candidates all across the country, candidates who are running for, Congress, all the way down to candidates who are running for school board, both on the East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, you name it. And what I thought was really interesting that each of these candidates were naming the same issues when it came to engaging young people on literally all different levels of races. When we were asking candidates, what do you need, right, to engage young people in your community? What are challenges that you're facing to engage young voters, both at colleges and universities, but also in high schools and middle schools even? How do we engage people in the political process? And over again, I had candidates telling me literally three exact same things. The first one was like, I want to get young people involved, but as a person running for local office, I have limited resources. There's only so much time and field staff that I can dedicate to engaging young voters. And if you're in a community where youth civic engagement is not robust and there is no culture and infrastructure for engaging young organizers, that's a lot of time and resources to invest in creating that. And so that was one issue that people kept mentioning as like, I want to, but I just don't have the resources or capacity. The second thing was a lot of candidates, even candidates who were millennials themselves and were young people, were saying that they didn't have access to young people in their community. They didn't know where was the best place to talk to young voters outside of like the public central hubs on campuses or in their communities. They didn't know, how do we best organize students, right, in our campuses and communities based on their schedules. Like access was a huge problem, even for young candidates who are running for office. And then finally, a lot of candidates were saying, even if I am a millennial person running for office, or even if I have children, I don't know how to speak to young candidates or what issues, especially on the local level, right, that will drive young voters to both vote for me and also people to, campaign and to be involved in my campaign. And so when we created the Gen Vote model, presented this as a solution to the candidates that we've worked with so far, they have been overwhelmingly supportive. So far to the point where we've actually have had young people in campuses that we work with or in local communities that we work with, inspired by the Gen Vote teams that operate in their communities, and actually then run for office. Because if they see that there are a trained group of organizers that are working on the ground level to help elect progressive candidates on the local level beyond, Congress and the presidential campaigns, they have a support network and they feel more empowered to run for office and be a champion for issues affecting young people in their community. And we have, as a result of all of these conversations and talking to candidates that were inspired by Gen voters in the community to run for office, are actually piloting now what we call the Gen Vote Academy for Candidates, where we essentially take the training curricula and programs that we have for students and modify them to be helpful for young candidates or young staff members in campaigns to organize young people in their communities where we do not otherwise have a Generation Vote team working in currently.
So, I think that prior to a couple of years ago, maybe the sort of general attitude of a lot of people is that young people don't vote, for lots of reasons, that we can't necessarily count on young people. We like that they're getting more progressive, but, they're not necessarily voting. And it seems like now, in a lot of ways, the young people, and young, I'm putting in quotations that you can't see, means for me anything up to like 30. But that really the young people are sort of leading the way on so many issues. We're certainly seeing that on climate change, for instance, and gun reform. That the youth are sort of really leading the charge. What is your sort of general sense of the level of engagement of people of your generation in politics, in activism? Do you think that it's a sort of part and parcel of everybody getting more involved and interested in politics over the past couple of years? Do you think that there is something particular about your generation that is causing them to sort of really step up and take the lead?
Oh, that's a great question. So definitely, I think that 2018 showed that our generation is a force to be reckoned with, right? And so what was really exciting is actually a recent study came out by the, I believe, National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, a group out of Tufts University, that showed that voting rates amongst college students more than doubled from 2014 to 2018 midterm elections, right? So if you look at the youth turnout rate and who went out to vote amongst young voters in 2014, it was really small, right? The voting rate was only about 19% in 2014. And this recent report showed that voting turnout basically doubled, and approximately 40% of student voters turned out to vote in 2018, according to the study. And if you even look within the student voting bloc, the turnout gap actually decreased between older voters in communities and younger voters. And amongst almost all different types of racial and ethnic groups, turnout also increased, with Black female voters taking the lead in college campuses and in youth communities across the country. And so I think that's really promising, right, in terms of showing that our generation is motivated to make a difference and actually be heard at the polls. But there's a lot of work to be done. If you look at even the distribution of votes within campuses, you'll see that students who are engaged in and major in humanities, such as political science and sociology and history, for example, are more likely to vote than their STEM peers. And the difference is pretty interesting if you look at the gap there. Beyond that, you also will see that students who register to vote and who actually name their motivations for voting according to polls are saying that they are feeling more independent, right? They aren't relying on their party affiliation when casting a vote for a candidate at the polls. And so once again, I think all these things, just all these studies show that our generation is interested in getting involved. We want to show up to the polls and vote for candidates, but we are showing up for very different reasons than other generations were prior to us. We are paying attention to what's going on both on the national level and local level, and we will continue to be engaged. And I'm sure that we will see increases in youth voter turnout, particularly in 2020. But again, there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of engaging all voters, young voters in our communities, making sure that we are getting students involved who are not traditionally targeted by campaigns and political science organizations on campuses. We need to make sure that students and students of color are being heard, not just at the ballot box, but also within campaigns, right? Within campaign leadership in local communities. And we need to ensure that, again, it all comes down to the issues, and our generation is more willing to vote for a candidate who stands up for issues that we care about in a local community than just relying on the traditional party affiliations and factors that we have seen in the past.
Yeah, that's really neat. And it's exciting. I'm, a parent of young children. And so it's exciting to think that that this could continue and that we could continue to have the sort of next generations of kids coming up being very involved and aware of what's going on around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited about it as a millennial / Generation Z myself.
Yes, I'm one of those Gen X / millennial cusps.
Oh, so
we're on the cusp. We're on the opposite cusps. Yeah.
Exactly.
So if people are listening and want to either help out if they're more like my generation, or want to get involved if they are in this younger generation, what are some ways that they can help and get involved?
Right. So if you are interested in getting involved with Generation Vote, you can check out our website, genvote.org. And there you can learn about how you can get involved in terms of starting a Gen Vote team in your community if you don't already have students working there. Or if you're a candidate running for office and after listening to this, you are motivated to get, young folks to work with you and partner with you to elect you into office, you can also find out how you can get involved with our Gen Vote Academy, as well as working with Gen Vote students in your community. And beyond those two things, my biggest recommendation, if you are a young person listening to this and you want to get involved, look into what's going on in your local community. There's going to be a lot of talk and a lot of resources pouring into the national conversation, which is still incredibly important. But we need to make sure that we are educating ourselves and getting our peers involved at all levels of government. And so check out what races are happening, who's up for office both this year and next year, and get involved in any way you can.
All right. Excellent. I love it. And we'll put links up on our website to that as well so that people can find out more. Well, Brianna, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. This is really exciting what you're working on, and I think all of us are so grateful that that your generation has really stepped up in a lot of ways, sort of pulled the older generations kicking and screaming toward progress.
Thank you. We appreciate your support, both as allies, and thank you again for having us today.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.